Ladies and gentlemen, we are back on League on Lock with the LEC regular season behind us. We got to look back at the performances that were and see who deserves to be on that oh-so-coveted all-pro squad, specifically that first team. And the real question is, how many G2 members should be on that first team? Because you know there's going to be probably at least 3 and maybe as high as 5. You could just throw the entire G2 roster on that all-pro squad, and I think a lot of people wouldn't even bat an eye, but we are a little bit different. We only have 4 G2 members on that first team squad, and I mean, a couple of them, there's really no argument. Someone like Jankos, Caps, maybe even the bottom lane, there's no argument, but we want it to be a little bit different. And to be fair, I think Wunder, I mean, he hasn't had to have the carry performances that he's had in splits past on G2, and Bwipo has been one of, if not the most important member for Fnatic here in the summer split. So I think it is fair. I think it's absolutely deserving that he is the one member not on that G2 roster that makes the all-pro squad. I think you've seen some interesting picks from him. I mean, the Rengar games, we'll try and forget about those, but I mean, he's been playing. No one plays Urgot, really, and he had a carry performance on that. He's carried some games. I don't care what you say about that Reckless's Garen performance. I think Bwipo's Jace was the standout one there. This guy smashes the laning phase, and I think we've seen less of those kind of overextensions, less of those Hooney type plays where he's just getting caught out, not in the right position, dying for no reason, unless of course he is playing Rengar. But for the most part, this guy, not only is he about the team first at all times, we've seen him so many times on tank duty, just supporting Reckless or Caps at the time, but here in the summer split of 2019, he finally got to kind of showcase his mechanics and his talent on a lot of these different carries, and he's definitely delivered for Fnatic. He helped deliver them right into that bye spot, a top 2 finish in the regular season. I think Bwipo, maybe not the best player on Fnatic, but was the most important in summer, and really Wunder was the one player that you could argue doesn't deserve to be on there for the G2 roster. Now, he's still been fantastic. He just hasn't had to carry the load that we've seen in splits past. The other members on G2, there's really no argument, especially when you are talking about that man in the jungle, Jankos. Look at those numbers. First in pretty much all of these important categories. For all the jokes about him only playing tanks, he actually has the highest damage numbers amongst all junglers. I'm sure that's skewed a little bit because of, you know, Kiana games and things like that, where you're the main carry on the squad. But I think Jankos is the front runner and should be getting the MVP award for this entire split, where pretty much everyone on his roster is playing some sort of insane, different off-roll thing. I mean, you're watching Annie top, you're seeing some crazy stuff. It's been Jankos who has been that absolute rock in the jungle, and I know people like to bring up the fact that this guy's laners are so absolutely insane. Of course he looks like a great jungler. Anyone could when your laners are Wunder, Caps, and Perks, but that hasn't necessarily been the case here. I think Jankos has just completely dominated, not even with his laners involved, just throughout the jungle. He has been absolutely consistent. There's really been no bad performance of his that you can look to throughout the entirety of the split. He should be the MVP, and he should absolutely be on that first team as the jungler, as should his buddy Caps, who we know it fluctuates between Caps and Craps. We definitely had a lot more Caps in 2019 summer, and we've had mostly Caps here throughout his entire stint on G2. 20 solo kills this split is absolutely insane. It was 7 more than the next highest from mid laners. And the thing with Caps is a lot of the times his numbers don't completely jump out at you, because sometimes he does kind of had a dud of a game, but I mean, there's no doubt he's the most mechanically gifted and the best mid laner in Europe, the best player in the Western scene right now. But I think Jankos still gets the MVP nod for him. And the bottom lane, we're talking Umajan or Perks and Mickey, and I think it is incredible how quickly Perks has kind of turned into a star AD carry, and really, yeah, there were some odd 2v2 losses that Perks and Mickey had that were questionable, where they just died straight up in a 2v2 without any jungler pressure. But for the most part, and I think in spring you could kind of talk about some positioning errors that Perkz had, which is that's what you'd expect for a guy playing AD carry for the very first time. But the growth we've seen from him already here in the summer split is absolutely incredible. They still have that so highly coveted flex capability where he can still play Yasuo. He's still probably the best Yasuo on G2, better than Caps. So to be able to throw that or some mages still in that bottom lane is just such an added strength to this G2 roster. And now he even looks more comfortable on those traditional marksmen. So Perkz and Mickey both as a duo I think are the best in EU. I think Mickey, he might be your second candidate for MVP behind Jankos because of what he does for G2 in terms of that kind of duo vision setup between him and Jankos and the roaming that he does on pretty much any champion. And his mid lane Gragas, I mean, he's probably the best Gragas player on G2 as well. So just the flexibility that the bottom lane brings for G2 is the biggest thing that they have going for them. 4 members of G2 on the first team All-Pro, and I don't really know if you can make an argument for having less than them. You could say Wonder's in there, but you need at least 4 of them on that first team. Coming up after the break, who makes up the rest of the All-Pro squads? Because there's only one G2 member left, which means some other teams need to get represented. Hello friends, we are back on League Unlocked looking at some all-pro noms for the LEC, at least who we think should be getting there. First team was very G2 heavy, and the second team, it's only 20% of G2, but it is still Wonder. He wasn't there on that first team with the rest of his boys, but he's got to at least get some credit here on that second team, because for similar reasons why he's not on that first team, the fact that he's played so many different champions. He played 14 different champions. There's only 18 games in the regular season. So that's 4 repeat games. Guys playing Annie, Soraka, and Garen. I mean, you list those 3 champions, and I would literally have no idea what role this guy plays if those are the 3 champions he's playing. And top lane would probably be my 3rd or 4th guess at that point. So, I mean, the numbers are not necessarily there. He's kind of left on the top lane island a lot of the time for G2, but he's still capable and can still dominate his lane. He's a second team top laner. Broxa, I think Jankos has clearly had the better season for G2 than Broxa has, but he's still a premier and can be a world-class jungler. He's still the driving force. Right, him and Whippo have been the most important players for Fnatic this split. I think he's definitely still deserving of that second team. 55% first blood rate. He's the first blood king. That's higher than Jankos' so far. So Broxa, still a solid split. His KDA not nearly as insane. He's usually approaching double digits, but he still had a solid split. Nemesis there in the mid lane for Fnatic. I mean, it hasn't taken long for this guy to groom and develop into one of the best mid laners in the LEC. Again, I think it's a pretty severe, not severe, there's a big gap between him and Caps, as is with any other mid laner in the LEC right now. But with Nukeduck struggling and Origin having just a frankly abysmal second half of the split, I think Nemesis kind of gets promoted into that second team spot when it comes to a mid laner. I know the memes are he's a Twisted Fate one trick, but the biggest difference here between summer and spring is you've actually seen some comps built around him, and he can finally showcase his mechanics and talent and really take over a lot of these games, especially with Reckless kind of taking a back seat here, playing a lot of Karma and more supportive type champions. It's really been able to showcase the carry capabilities of Whippo and Nemesis on this Fnatic roster. And again, they delivered them to a second place finish and a bye, so they've definitely lived up to the hype so far. And for the bottom lane on that second team All-Pro squad, look at that. A couple of Shulka members upset even when his squad is struggling. You know that he's going to be up there in the top 3. And Ignar, him and Trick, man, it's amazing that these guys were on the bar none worst team in the LCK just a year ago on BBQ Oliver's, because they have been godsends here for Shulka in this summer split. Ignar and Trick both just kind of running everything for the Shulka squad. And look at those numbers for upset. Absolutely disgusting damage and kill share. We know that ever since this guy came up from the challenger scene, he has been a carry. He's been the focused person for whatever roster he's been on, and it's still very much the same. They want to spoon feed him kills. This guy's not playing Karma. He's not playing Garen. He's not playing any mages in the bottom lane. Give him a marksman. Feed him triple kills 24/7, and most of the time, more often than not for sure, he will carry you to victory. Kai'Sa has quickly become one of his favorite, and kind of it's synonymous with him where he's had such great carry performances. But that bottom lane for Schalke, I think, is just right behind G2 in terms of laning dominance, and a lot of their wins are coming through that bot lane for Schalke. Well deserved. I think they should be right up there as your second team All-Pro bottom lane. When we get to that third team, obviously, we're through these two teams, and the team that finished third doesn't even have any representatives on here yet on this list. Well, they absolutely need to have some members on here, and they do on that third team. But if you start in the top lane, I mean, Cabochard, it was another split of Vitality being incredibly inconsistent, almost stumbling their way out of playoffs. And yet again, it was Cabo who is the far and away most consistent and really the only consistent member of that Vitality roster. Even in games they're losing, he's doing well in lane, even in losing matchups a lot of the time. He is a terrific top laner, and again, deserves an all-pro nod. Xerxes, listen, he has the trouble of being in the same region as Jankos and Broxa, who are both world-class junglers, but Xerxes, I think, is right behind them in that tier. He has been incredible for Splice. Him combined with Kobbe clearly are the most important members of Splice, and I mean, it's basically early game, late game, they both got you covered. And where it gets tricky here is that mid lane, because we thought about Humanoid, and Humanoid's really the guy who's right behind. He'd be on that made-up fourth team, but we've got to acknowledge what Larson did here this split for Rogue, because, and by the way, he is the clear front runner, or should be, for Rookie of the Split. We knew that the youth movement coming in for Rogue would be much better than the veteran lineup where we knew what they had proven already, but he has been just absolutely incredible. And I don't understand how Europe does it. They just keep churning out these young mid laners that after a split, or half a split basically for Larson, they all of a sudden become this dominant force. And I think, I mean, Rogue, he helped get them to playoffs again in his rookie split. You saw what Selfmade did with SK in spring, guiding them there. Larson, if you look at his carry performances, Rogue only had 7 wins, which again is enough to get them into playoffs. But 5 of those 7 wins, Larson didn't even die. He was perfect in the KDA department. All their wins, I mean, it was about him performing at an extremely high level. Him and Inspired both have been absolutely incredible, but I think Larson even more so. He should be Rookie of the Split, and I mean, his laning numbers and his team fight numbers back up, and really he passes the eye test. He deserves that third team recognition. And then we got another Fnatic member there. Hylissang comes in as your support. The KDA's not there. None of the numbers necessarily are there except for that first blood number, but we know Hylissang is the first man to die for his team, whether it's a good idea or a bad idea, but he's all over the map, just constantly getting his teammates ahead. And even though, I mean, you're maybe not dominating lane when you're playing Garen and Yuumi, but he was putting up insane numbers on that damage numbers that is, and just what he does for that team, and the mechanics are still there. Hylissang still deserves a spot on that all-pro squad for Fnatic. Reckless, the only one from Fnatic not on any of these lists. That's it today for League Unlocked. My name's Eric. Thank you guys for hanging out as always. We'll catch you next time.